Think of Lindsay Flores. She is a longtime 4-H'er in Barton County, is now a senior at Pittsburgh State University. But once I thought of her, I couldn't get her out of my head. I thought this would be a perfect way. We just finished celebrating the 4-H youth, the programs, the community service projects they do. We've seen examples of support they get from other communities because they do such great work here. Lindsay, to me, is an example of what 4-H can do for our kids. They're bright, they're brought up in loving homes, but 4-H seems to unleash that leadership potential, give them the confidence that they can go forth and do things that you wouldn't think someone from little old Lamar, Missouri would do. Now, Lindsay's not far in her career. She's just in her 20s. She's going to graduate in May. She is going to go on to graduate school. But she has already done some exciting and fascinating things and credits her ability to move forward and do these things with the experiences and the life lessons she's learned in 4-H. As we know, you can't learn everything in the classroom, so I'm just excited for us to all hear Lindsay's story this evening. Please join me in welcoming Lindsay Flores.
I'm going to just take this down. I like to walk while I talk. Excuse me for a moment. So, thank you so much for that introduction, Ms. McComber. That was very lovely and very generous of you. Like she said, I'm a senior at Pittsburgh State University. I'll be graduating this May with my double bachelor's degree in communications and Spanish. And tonight I'm here to tell you about my 4-H story. Now, it's not your traditional 4-H story, where I come from a long generation of 4-H'ers. Growing up as a 4-H Clover kid, not at all. Actually, it's quite the contrary. I didn't start 4-H until I was a freshman in high school. And so I would like to tell you about that journey that I've had since my first day in high school. Growing up, my mom always told me and my brothers to always give everything a chance. Whether that was the green beans that she put on her plate at dinner or the new books at the library, she always thought it was important to have an experience. Well, one day when I was coming home from my freshman year of high school, I walked into her room and she told me that a lady had been by in her office inviting me to a 4-H club meeting. And I looked at my mom and I told her, I was like, Mom, I don't know the first thing about herding chickens or growing cows. So why do you think I can be in 4-H? And she's like, well, Lindsay, what the lady had told me when she walked in was it was a new group called the Barton County Junior Leaders who were going to be focusing on community service, and she thought that would be a good experience for me. So, as my mom had always taught me, I decided to take the chance and gave it a shot. I was skeptical at first. And so I showed up to my first meeting at the Lewis and Loretta Wolf Center right down the street, and I was surprised to see that there were other people there, other peers from my high school, that were in 4-H. I didn't expect them to be there. And surprisingly, I didn't find a group of animals in the building. I actually found some flags and some flagpoles that needed to be repaired. And that was my first community service project. And that was the first of many. For the next 4 years, I had worked with my club to do projects from raising money and raising food to help impoverished kids to go home with meals for the weekend, to raising money for hygiene products to be donated to the local sheltered workshop, and one of my favorite projects, which was the Rick Mammon Memorial Sidewalk Project, where we were able to plan and design a sidewalk that will be here for generations to come. And in each of these projects, it wasn't until later in my life, once I got into college, that I realized they had given me invaluable lessons. These lessons were communication lessons, lessons that I never thought I would ever need otherwise. One of them being able to have a youth-adult partnership. These are one of the things that 4-H prides itself on as an organization for youth. It wasn't until I got to college that I noticed that I was able to talk to my administrators, to my professors, in a manner that nobody else in my classes could. I was working with them on councils by my sophomore year of college. And it was because when I was a sophomore in high school, I was asking for donations from community business leaders. I was asking for support from our local commissioners. And I was talking to my teachers to be supportive in the work that 4-Hers were doing back here in Barton County. But I can't take all the credit for everything that I have done, because it is the people that have supported me behind all this time that deserve the biggest thanks. And my biggest supporter this entire journey has been Miss Elaine Davis. And if it hadn't been for her standing right there behind me every time, whether that's taking a picture so I will remember it years from now, or telling me that I can do it, even though I didn't think I could, it is because of her and all of you here who support your 4-H youth is why I'm here today, and part of the reason why 4-H and Extension are going to continue for the next 100 years. And so, by the time I had gotten to the end of my high school career, I figured I'd made it a lot farther than most kids my age had done in 4-H anyway, and I was hoping at this point I would be able to find a career within 4-H, whether that was at my local extension office or in Washington, D.C. at the National 4-H Council. And to my surprise, that was a dream that came true much sooner than expected. I had gotten a call my freshman year of college after sitting in my dorm room. It was actually an email, it wasn't a call. It was an email from a lady named Joanne Leatherman. And she said that she was from National 4-H Council. And I was like, wow, that's a pretty big deal. And she was telling me she would really like to have me in National 4-H Council at the center in Chevy Chase, Maryland, to be part of a new council for healthy living. And that she wanted me to be a youth representative. And I was like, I'm not even sure if I know this woman. So of course I called up Miss Elaine. I was like, Miss Elaine, do you know who this is? Because she's offering me an opportunity of a lifetime. And turns out, my sophomore year of high school, I had actually met Miss Leatherman. She had come down to interview the Barton County Teen Leaders Group about a project that we were working on from a grant that we had received from Ahokala. And I had talked to her. I had no idea that I actually knew this woman. And so, of course, once Miss Elaine had explained this to me, I took the opportunity, and the next thing I know, in September, me and Miss Elaine are off on a plane down to Washington, D.C. I went when I was a child, but I really didn't remember. So honestly, this was my first time experiencing D.C. as an adult. We made it to the Chevy Chase 4-H Conference Center, the first time I'd ever been there. And we walked into a room where there was a council of people that I had no idea who they were. Miss Leatherman came in and introduced herself. And for the next 2 years, and that was the beginning of the next 2 years for me. I had sat in these council meetings about twice a year where they would fly me down so I could tell them what I thought. As a millennial generationer, they thought it was very important that 4-H youth our age have some input in the curriculum that they were wanting to implement from a national level. This group was put together so that way healthy living strategies and curriculum could be passed down from the national to the regional, state, and local levels. And because of the work I had done here in Barton County, is the reason why I've been one of the 5 to be selected on this council. We were the first 5 youth in the nation, in the history of 4-H, to stand on a council at the national level. It was quite an honor. Thank you. And so, for the next 2 years, I collaborated with these other 5 youth on projects with this council. We were tasked with a national video competition. In this competition we wanted youth from everywhere around the country to submit a video about why is it important to be a healthy living ambassador. And we had hundreds of submissions, and 5 of them were chosen through the Molina healthcare system that we had partnered with National 4-H Council. And 5 of these youth were awarded scholarships to continue their education in healthy living. And that was a wonderful thing to be a part of. The next task we had was to continue our legacy on this council. Like I said, we were the first 5 youth. Sometimes we really didn't know what we were doing, even though it might have seemed like we did. And so we needed to lay out what our job description was and put out an application, so that way youth voice could be continued to be heard with National 4-H Council. And so, after reviewing another hundreds of applications, I reviewed dozens of them myself. We selected 5 youth to continue on in our place after my sophomore year of college. And the final opportunity I had with National 4-H Council, or so I had thought at the time, was to be part of a healthy living campaign, partnering with The Biggest Loser, season 14 winner Joe Ostawoski. NBC Studios had shown up to the National 4-H Council to film the beginning of the cross-country bike tour that Joe was going to do from Chevy Chase, Maryland, all the way to Calabasas, California, to the Biggest Loser Ranch. And I and the other 5 youth were there to help support Joe in his journey and to be change agents for youth, not only in 4-H, but around America, to see that we were taking a stand to stand against childhood obesity. And I'd come to a point after that, it was a wonderful opportunity. I couldn't believe I was there. I actually had the opportunity to be in the documentary that Joe had made. I didn't make the final cut for the Biggest Loser episode, but that's okay. So now I joke with everybody, hey, I was on The Biggest Loser. Not how you think, though. And so once again, I came to another point in my life where I thought, so this is it. This is where 4-H ends for me. Well, God had other plans. And so I once again got an opportunity this year, actually, to sit on the 4-H Council again with the National Leadership Advisory Team. I'm with 4 other youth who represent the healthy living side, and we're working with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation to create what we call a culture of health throughout the United States. That's still in the process, and we're still working on it, so hopefully you'll be seeing some good opportunities come from that here in the extension. But one of my favorite memories that I would like to talk to you guys about tonight is my time as an intern with National 4-H Council this past summer. I had the opportunity to serve as a Citizenship Washington focused program assistant. And pretty much that means I was a licensed Washington, D.C. tour guide and facilitator for youth, for high school youth, for 8 weeks this summer. It was just after my junior year. I had 2 days off from school, and next thing I know, I was on another plane back to Washington, D.C. for the next 8 weeks. And honest to goodness, it was probably the hardest thing I had ever done. But at the same time, it was one of the most rewarding experiences I've ever had in 4-H. As soon as I got there, I had met 10 other youth, very passionate about 4-H, had a very similar ideology and outlook that I did with 4-H, because they knew it was more than just a club. Because they knew what we were doing there was more than just a job. It was going to be a commitment to the youth under us, to help teach them what had been taught to us. And I tried to remember that the best I could throughout the summer. And the most difficult part about it was learning the routes, the bus routes. That was the hardest part for me. It just, sometimes you get confused, so thank goodness they put me on a bus where the bus driver knew his way around town. And so you also had to learn the commentary and how to facilitate a congressional workshop and mock Senate sessions and that kind of thing. And throughout these 8 weeks, I had learned a lot of lessons that I never thought I would be able to learn in my life, lessons I know I would never learn in the classroom. And I'd like to share with you tonight a couple stories that taught me those lessons. So first, one of our tours was in the memorials. One of the most famous ones would be Abraham Lincoln. And every time we would go see that in the evenings, I would tell the students to make sure you look real hard. Look and see what you can see, and I will tell you what the hidden message is behind there. And when they'd come back, I would tell them that if you look at the hands of Abraham Lincoln, you would see that one was open and the other one was closed. And in all actuality, what that meant was that he was doing sign language. When you hold him up, they're his initials, A and L. And that's because he had a deaf son. And the architect wanted to show the world that. The other thing you can tell is if you look straight at his face, you can see that it's split because in two emotions. On one side, it's very solemn and grim, very stressed and weary. And that's because during the time Abraham Lincoln was president, the Civil War was going on. And he had a lot of frustrations, a lot of worries with that. He didn't know if he was going to be the president that the Union stayed under or the president that the Union fell from. And on the other side of his face, you could tell that he was extremely poised. He was very relaxed. And that's because he wanted to make sure that when he showed up in public, that he was a sign of hope and strength to the American people. And so by taking the kids on this tour, I was able to realize from a lesson for myself that to look farther and to look deeper into the meanings of your everyday scenery, to be more aware of your surroundings and know that there's a deeper story behind everything that is out there. Another opportunity I had this summer was to go to the Holocaust Museum. I went every Friday. And after about the fifth Friday, it was a wonderful museum, probably the best in DC, tour guide official, best in DC. And I had gotten the opportunity to meet a Holocaust survivor, and he told me his story. A story that I never thought I would be able to hear from a person who had actually survived it. He told me, I'd asked him, what was the worst part? I was almost scared for his answer. And this is what he told me. In the Holocaust, he had lived for 5 years in the Holocaust. He started when he was 12. Well, it happened when he was 12, and he got out when he was 17, being liberated by the American troops. And during that time, he had went to every concentration camp. He even showed me the tattoo on his arm. AA893 was his number. And during his time there, when he went to every concentration camp, the way that the Nazis had moved the prisoners was in what is called a cattle car. And to me, I'm not really sure what that is, but it's a box. And it's very small. They put 75 to 100 people in that cattle car to move them for 3 days and 3 nights nonstop. And he remembers the worst part was he was in that cattle car with people who were lying dead by his feet because nobody could sit down because it was so packed. And because people couldn't relieve themselves outside of the cattle car, and so they had to stand in their own waste. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine hearing somebody tell that story and you know that they lived it? At 15, 16 years old. And then get this. The cattle car had windows. They were about this big. Just enough so you could see outside of them. And if the Nazis were feeling nice, they would leave them open. And those who were surviving inside the cattle car would make a rotation so each person could have about 2 minutes of fresh air. And you could not stay more than your 2 minutes. But if the Nazis were not feeling nice that day, they would close them. And for 3 days and 3 nights, you would be in that environment in the dark. It was an eye-opening story, for sure. His name was Henry Greenbaum, and I am so glad that I got to meet him. And it was a life-changing moment because by listening to his story, I learned to listen to anyone who is willing to talk. Because you never know what you might learn. You never know whose life you're impacting, but the life that is impacting you. And so the final story I would have for you guys tonight, which I'm sure most of you guys will appreciate this one, is the time that I went to Mount Vernon, which is George Washington's estate. At the time, I had no clue. I had no clue what Mount Vernon was. I must not have read about it in high school. But it's what some would consider the first White House. It's the land and the house that George Washington built himself. And on this estate, it's quite a large estate, he has a 16-sided barn. As the first president of the United States, the man who cut down the cherry tree, and the man who had wooden teeth. And yeah, they're on display at his museum on Mount Vernon. They're real. He did have wooden teeth. But with this 16-sided barn, what little people know about George Washington is that he was a great innovator for farming. What he had done is he designed this barn. It's circular. And so there are two sections in it. There's an outside circle and an inside circle. On the outside circle, the floor would be made of slatted wood. So that way, when he would lay down the straw, and on the inside, he would have his farm workers stand in the center and have horses trample on the straw that he would lay down on the floor. And so when the horses would trample across the straw, the wheat and the grain would fall out into the harvesting container below the floor. And it became a new way for them to harvest grain instead of doing it by hand. Who knew George Washington reinvented harvesting? Nobody really knows that, huh? And so the lesson I learned from that experience was to just simply appreciate the hard work and innovation of those before me. Because my life would not be what it is today if it wasn't for them. And just like George Washington, just like Abraham Lincoln, just like Henry Greenbaum, the people of the past, the people of the present, like you 4-H'ers, like you Extension Council members, and the supporters in this room, and the 4-H'ers of our future, the ones who will be coming, these are the people that will help Extension continue for the next 100 years. And I am so proud to be a part of this community. And I am so proud to be here for you tonight. And I really enjoy having you here. Thank you so much for your time, and have a wonderful evening.
Oh, she was better than I even thought. Come back. So we have a little thank you gift for you. But you know what? I had trouble finding fashion accessories in 4-H green. But I came close. There you go. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Well, that's it for our program, and I think we hit a home run with an uplifting, exciting speaker.